All right, I think I'm back.
So much better.
We were just actually discussing this a few minutes ago, and tech issues are a thing still today. So I'm just gonna like finish up here and introduce Isa Noyola, who um, is a really incredible person. I've known Isa for a few years, and every time I'm in a space with Isa, I feel like I walk away having a better sense of my own queer identity. So Isa is a first generation Mexicana, Translatina. Some of you, the lawyers in the room, might know her as the former deputy director of the Transgender Law Center. And currently, Isa is the deputy director at Mi Gente, which is a political, digital, and grassroots hub for Latinx and Chicanx organizations and movement building. Isa has been profiled on CNN, MSNBC, Democracy Now!, Latina Magazine, the list goes on and on. Isa, it's so great to have you here today.
Hi, can folks hear me?
Yes.
Great, awesome.
All right, well, I'll let you and Ari take it away, and me and my tech issues will be gone for now.
No, thank you so much, Carlos. Yeah, so in case folks are having a little bit of trouble hearing that introduction, we are going to be doing a conversation with me and with Isa, and you're welcome to post any questions directly in the chat. We'll try to reserve some time at the end for Q&A. Well, I think everyone was able to hear your introduction, though, Isa. You're doing some incredible work. I was thinking we could start by just talking a little bit about what your current position is. So if you wouldn't mind telling folks where you are right now.
So again, hi everyone, I'm Issa Noyola. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the deputy director at Mi Gente. And you know, I've been in movement work for about close to 15 years now, originally starting in San Francisco in the neighborhood of the Mission, founding an organization, a trans immigrant organization called Ella para Translatinas, and doing local work, working also at a youth, LGBT youth org called Lyric. And from there, just doing, you know, seeing sort of the gaps and the needs for trans Latina leadership in the broader movement work. So started doing national work soon after at the Transgender Law Center in particular, and also with helped to co-found an organization called Familia Trans Queer Liberation Movement. And so right now I kind of play different hats, both in Mi Gente, of doing back-end admin, ops, HR, fundraising work, and then also movement work for queer and trans liberation, and in particular for queer trans immigrants. And so we have, right now we're in full force of our AntiTrans detention campaign, where we have clear demands to end the detention of all trans immigrants and folks living with HIV from for-profit and ICE-run detention facilities. And so we've been doing a month-long of actions, culminating in a action next week in DC. So it's a busy time, and you know, for us, you know, our campaign is really, we're moving a lot of muscle this month because we just feel that, you know, there is no pride in detention at the end of the day. And so I know there's a lot to celebrate in our communities, but also I think the roots of pride are about resistance and fighting state violence at the end of the day. That's what the sort of initial riots, why they happened. It was fighting against those systems of oppression.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much for bringing that to everyone's attention. I hope everyone will go check out that campaign. And all of the organizations that you've mentioned, they're all organizations that I've had the pleasure of also collaborating with in our work. Many of our clients have found support in Ella and other of the organizations you're mentioning. So thank you. And I'm so excited for you to be here with us. This program is really about diving into the issues so that we can raise awareness, so folks can have a better understanding of the situation and also what they can do to improve it. So to sort of kick us off, I think sometimes people need to be reminded, in your day-to-day work, what are some examples of how anti-trans sentiment shows up? Could be things like questions, behaviors, statements that you see in your day-to-day work.
Well, I think I have to zoom back a bit in order to be able to answer that. And I think for all of us just to understand, I think, Carlos mentioned sort of the Bostick decision that was handed down a year ago in Supreme Court, where essentially, made it illegal to discriminate against sex and against LGBT communities. And so, and I think it really upheld Title VII and really cemented sort of the meaning of the Civil Rights Act. That was in 1964, right? So these, I think for us to recognize that systems change it's not just, it doesn't happen in one instance, and sort of like we're trying to move policies, we're trying to move legal decisions in a way that benefits the community, so that we all deserve healthy communities at the end of the day. And so, but the ways that hearts and minds and culture change and follow, that always tends to lag, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's for us to understand that at the end of the day, we live in a white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal, transphobic system, right? And all the other isms. And so I think we have to kind of, in some ways, for us to really address some of the behaviors, we have to all accept that our minds have been conditioned and colonized in this way. Mm-hmm. Because if we feel like we're exempt from that, then the awareness that we bring into conversations or our behaviors is really reflected, because we're just acting carelessly and without awareness or intention, right? And so I think, that is really the first step to really identifying what that looks like, because all of our, because it starts with us as individuals, and then, within our roles in the workplace are then reflected in our behaviors, right? And what we deemed as okay or acceptable, mm-hmm. right? Workplace behavior. And so when we start to try to deconstruct and decolonize and raise our consciousness around these issues, we then find and we question, you should then that leads you into the rabbit hole of why are we upholding a binary system around sex and gender? Why don't we have bathrooms that are set up in a different way, right? Why are the plumbing codes in San Francisco, it just follows a string of questions, right? Absolutely. And buildings are constructed, architecture, the ways that we take for granted certain things. A lot of our interactions are based on people's presentation, right? Mm-hmm. And expression. And so I think that to me is those are the nuances that it's hard sometimes for me to answer that question, because we have to step back and we have to understand these larger systems that are at play that influence our behavior, that inform our biases, whether we realize them or not,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that I presume sometimes that understanding, and I really appreciate you bringing us back to that context so that everyone is aware of how we are all conditioned by this society and these systems that we are sort of forced to live within. And we need to recognize that before we can move forward. So thank you.
I mean, I think for me it was that was part of my transitioning process, is to really understand those. It wasn't just, oh, I'm going to grow out my hair, I'm going to start to wear makeup, or I'm going to go by female pronoun. That to me, that my transitioning really started, it was an internal process. Yeah. And it was really to understand what I'm up against, how our system's designed to actually restrict my freedom, my expression, my authenticity of who I am as a person. It's complicated, and it's not set up for this society that we live in, and I constantly find myself bucking up against that everywhere I go. I travel quite a bit, and, part of my like rebellious nature is to like have people be confronted with that reality. And I've made a personal decision to not change my gender identity documents for that reason. Even though I work at Transgender Law Center, I know people are like, what? Every time I share that, they're like, why? Like, it wasn't about I didn't have access. I live in the Bay Area. Like, we did name and gender clinics all the time, you know? And so it wasn't about that. It was, for me, it was like, I actually want the state to reckon with looking at the picture, looking at me, and still like, I still actually have the right to go through this airport and through TSA. And yes, this TSA machine can say whatever or whatever, find whatever and scan my body. But at the end of the day, like, I need to exist and you need to deal with me. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Forcing that confrontation to their expectations.
And I know that's not everyone's like, that's not everyone what everyone wants to do. And some people just want to live their life and they just want to be like, you don't, you know, sometimes I'm like in a hurry and I don't want to deal with that. But
yeah,
politically I've made a decision, you know, I made certain decisions. And so, but that for trans people that are wanting to just live their daily lives and not like, it's not a fight, but it does become like the microaggressions actually trickle and they actually pour into something that becomes trauma, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to what you were just saying also about the starting out your process of what people often can sort of reduce down to the concept of coming out, into what you were talking about. I've had described to me as sort of this process of coming in as well. And we were talking about sort of evaluating how your existence is in society, what society is telling you, and then what you actually want for yourself. And that coming in process is sometimes done outside the public eye and something people aren't really aware of, but something everyone can do. Everyone can have that process of coming in and self-evaluation, I think is so important for people to be aware of.
When I worked at the LGBT youth org, we had a whole curriculum around sort of like different themes. It was like a thematic learning based like program. And so, you know, we had everyone, like we did Gender 101 for everyone because, you know, and when I've gone to elementary school, you know, and done workshops, gender workshops, you know, we have this one activity where we have like a stick figure. We divide the class into 2 teams and they're stick figures. And we say, you're assigned female, you're assigned male. So draw symbols, pictures, words. And like, these are grades, like young kids and how much they've like feel that whole, it's like not a problem. They know like all the words, all the picture, like all the figures, all of it, it's loaded, like how we've internalized what in our society, what a man means and what a woman means and what they look like, how they feel, how they smell, how they touch, like all of it, like what they look like, all of it ingrained in us in such an early age, you know. And I'm surprised when I do the activity with the young kids and how that, you know, carries over into our adulthood and like those notions are so ingrained in us without us realizing. And so if we never stop to question, you know, even if you're not trans or, you know what I'm saying, I think it's a healthy process for everyone to just even look at that for yourself and what that looks like in your family, what that looks like in your relationships, what that looks like, you know, politically, you know? And so I think it's important. It's not just trans people that should really have to go through that process.
Yeah, well, that's so funny that you say that because that's something I wanted to make sure we hit on today. I 100% agree. That leads me to sort of one of my questions, which would be in the abstract, if you could wave a magic wand and make cisgender people, for example, understand one thing, or society at large, because you know everyone might need to understand this. What would it be? What's one thing you wish you could just make it happen?
You know, I've done, and I know this is, I'm making assumptions that this is like an audience of lawyers, and working at the Transgender Law Center for several years, I've been in a room full of lawyers, and I've done presentations and for various institutions, and I think this is one of the toughest things that folks have to deal with and grapple is that unfortunately, there is no magic wand. And I think, folks who come to workshops and to these conversations and panels and keynotes that they find often frustration with me because they want the answer, they want that, like, that thing that is going
sound
to
bite.
yeah. And I think for me, the process to raise my consciousness, to decolonize, to let go of the binary and open myself up to the spectrum and fluidity of gender and sexuality is an ongoing process. And I think if we're wanting to really think about our individual behaviors and how do we change that, I think that requires rigor and courage. It's not just trans people that should be courageous for using the bathroom or for existing in the public sphere. That at the end of the day, that's why I do what I do and I work so hard in my advocacy. I don't want trans people to be courageous to go to the supermarket or to go to the bathroom or to play sports in high school. At the end of the day, there's so many other issues that we're needing to still fight for, and we can't get there when our basic rights and dignity are always up for political debate and, challenge. And when trans people are made a wedge issue over and over in every election cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely understanding this as it is an ongoing practice. There is not one training you can attend or one thing you can learn. Absolutely. Yeah. If I could build on something you were saying earlier too, the concept that I asked a friend of mine this question, Lily Zhang, who is also she's a trans DE&I expert. And her point was very similar to what you were saying earlier, which was, I want cisgender people included to understand that they are performing gender, that everyone is performing gender, everyone is engaging in the system, because perhaps if you could come to that realization, you could start to do some of the work that you're talking about in decolonizing yourself and really evaluating your presentation. Like you said, she got at, people who are cisgender and gender non-conforming too. And like, why can't a man wear a dress? Why can't everyone do whatever presentation?
And I get it. I mean, especially for lawyers in the room, I think, law school teaches folks to really think about law and what is possible and parameters and boundaries and how to define things in very specific ways. And it's always interesting for me to work with lawyers and how they're trained and like what law schools do to people.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like my challenge is to like pull that apart a bit for folks and complicate it. And especially around like when I work with immigration lawyers, like in thinking about someone's asylum case or when thinking about someone's claims, how trans experiences are really challenge all of that. And really kind of push the ideas around how we fit into these systems, right? And how legally we have rights to exist, And so I think that for me, the idea of how trans people have to navigate their daily lives and we have to change material conditions and how folks in this room are responsible for some of that is really important, because we can't get to the other issues if we're constantly sort of having to nitpick and really kind of always feel like we're putting it on the line around these basic rights like bathroom use or like people getting our pronouns right, at the end of the day, like your institutions should institute pronouns for everyone. Like it should be in your email header for everyone. It shouldn't just be trans people that feel like they need to put it in there. Like everyone should ask, like that should be just a standard question that everyone asks when they're introducing themselves or being introduced.
Exactly. And to pay attention. That's my takeaway is.
And mistakes happen. I make mistakes. And I think that's part of it, but we can't get hung up on the like feeling nervous about that. And that for me has always been like, it's true. Like I've made mistakes, and I've had to own up to it. I've had to like really learn, and it's sometimes like not fun. And I've had to then continue to really figure.
For example, an individual can be dressing in a way that you would expect a person of a particular gender to dress, and their pronouns might be completely different than what your expectations are, and that's 100% valid and is not determinative of what their identity is. And I think that what I've been a little bit afraid of as the sort of universality of pronoun discussion comes up, everybody is like, okay, I'm going to give my pronouns, is I don't necessarily see people working towards what Issa was talking about in really questioning and removing those expectations from people based around pronouns too. So that's what I would like to see, is to really recognize that like pronouns are just one component of how you can like show respect to an individual. You should absolutely respect them. You should ask them, and then don't make any more assumptions. Don't extrapolate from there just based on pronouns.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're here.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think, this isn't about checking off. This isn't about a checklist. And for all those that are in HR, I know that's hard. Trust me, I know. I'm in HR, I'm in ops, so I'm behind the scenes. So, but it really is about what we're asking for trans communities and really gender non-conforming, gender non-binary folks are really asking for, is to really push the conversation and the consciousness of people and our society. And I think pronouns is just one part of the bigger picture of what we're asking for and how we're thinking about healthy communities, right? And so we, if we're wanting to make meaningful change to, around poverty and around, houseless folks and around immigration and around criminalization and incarceration, we can't do any of that when we're still like, grappling with these like the basic parts of who we are and our identities,
Yeah, absolutely. You've brought up we've talked about pronouns, we've talked about bathrooms some, and we've talked about wanting to get past some of those basic things, but I do think some people still do need more coming to the table on some of those basic things. Are there other things that come to mind where folks can make sure that they are, being aware of those more concrete, basic, upfront things? And then I have more questions about how do we go deeper too.
I think what's really important and what makes the difference are your, really kind of taking inventory and really thinking about your relationships, relationship to not just yourself, but in your community, right? That, we often in the US, it's a very much an individual, we are in our individual experiences, but like we're also part of a community. And so if really think about, you're like, because I think that's what makes the difference, that's what humanizes us and really brings, like, it's fine to look at a documentary, it's fine that you're here and to listen to me, but also what do your relationships look like for like real people, folks that are going through real life every single day. I'm not on a reality show on purpose because, I think for me that like the relationships really make a difference in how people think about what happens to trans folks that are outside of the binary, that really challenge that. And so starting from that place, the individual place, to really understand the impacts, because it looks different on every day with folks. And I would say, public life is hard. I would say like one of the blessings that we had during the pandemic was that, a lot of trans folks and non-binary folks got to work from home where they felt like could, it was like, of course that was a double-edged sword, but in terms of just like the isolation, but in other ways, a lot of folks realized that we didn't have to deal with like all this other BS that was happening in the workplace, like, and how that impacts your mental health, right? And your ability to do what you're there to do, and like whatever you're there to like produce and work, and so I think that takes a toll, like that energy that you're putting into the like daily tasks and, you know, just the survival, right? And so I think for folks to understand that the process for trans communities, although we've always existed in every single civilization, that, you know, it's not just a new phenomenon. You know, we didn't just appear all of a sudden, like when Caitlyn Jenner appeared, or whatever, you know, like that.
Gosh, I hope not. No,
That
absolutely.
we've been part of every society in, you know, around the world for forever. And so I think there's a lot of understanding and connecting of history and knowledge to ground people in the idea that gender is a spectrum, gender is diverse, gender is complicated, and it's not as straightforward as what we have been teaching young folks in schools, you know, and in college.
Yeah, absolutely. You're making me think of, I was very aware that the pandemic started, you know, March, and my birthday was in May. And I was very aware that I hadn't been misgendered for a couple of months. And then right on my birthday, my mother-in-law misgendered me. It was like the moment I needed to be, like you said, in public for a moment in this like celebration, all of a sudden there's the confrontation. And when you're talking about just the weight that it has on your mental health, it's been described to me before at another presentation as like gender dysphoria noise. That it's this like this really oppressive noise that you're not even necessarily aware of all the ways that you are just constantly like, I don't know, trying to protect yourself, aware of how other people are perceiving you. Are you safe? Are you, living your life securely and openly? And it's very, very difficult to navigate through. So thank you for that.
And I mean, I think for me, when I think about why I love being trans is because it really has taught me to not take these things for granted. You know, because I've had to confront it and have had to deal with it, it's opened my mind in this amazing way that has raised my consciousness. It's really complicated things in how I view the world, how I view people, how I view communities, societies, cultures. And it's really challenged those ideas that have been ingrained and like crammed down our throat by popular culture and by institutions, you know? And so for me, that's been liberating.
Yeah. It's not enough to take a single workshop or think about just individualized steps, sort of like checking boxes. Like Issa said, there aren't enough boxes in the world to make it actually complete and inclusive in the way that we need it to be. It's an ongoing practice. I was going to ask Issa about other strategies for those in leadership, and hopefully she'll be able to come back and join us. Let's see. There's a question about services mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. I'm not sure if that's referring to something that Carlos mentioned about services, or about the services that Oasis provides, the organization that I work with. Hi, Issa, you're back.
Sorry,
You're okay.
I'm having lots of technical difficulties.
You're coming in perfectly clear now. I was sort of summarizing the point you made earlier about not being able to just do a checklist, that this is an ongoing practice. But we do have some people, you know, probably on the call, as you've already noted, who are probably in positions where they might be able to have more positional power and affect some change within their organizations.
Yeah.
Are there any strategies in terms of like practical steps that folks can take in an org, or even maybe just educational material too? Like how can we raise consciousness, start that dialogue?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is really thinking for organizations and companies and legal groups that are on viewing right now, and I think one is to understand, like, to really map the resources in your community. And in San Francisco, there's a plethora of organizations and community events that you all can support and uplift. It's bringing those outside voices in, not just during Pride Month, but on a regular basis. It shouldn't also just be your affinity group that is responsible for bringing in diverse voices into the conversation. There's so many issues to like dissect, and I think really partnering with local orgs and grassroots orgs that are doing the work, leaders, and there's like, I mean, maybe there was an excuse 10 years ago, you know, because, you know, there was a trans leadership and orgs were like lacking in infrastructure, but now there's like new projects and leadership emerging everywhere, and not just in the Bay, but around the country and around the world. I'm a part of various groups that help to resource these organizations. And if you go to the Trans Justice Funding website, there's they have a map of all the trans orgs that are around the country that you can like click on and find who they fund, you know, and they are funding emerging new projects and leadership, and not just traditional orgs, but like events. Like there's Southern Fried Queer Pride it's like an art cultural event that happens outside of Pride, and it's led by young people. You know, so there's lots of examples that you can like, if you go to Trans Justice Funding Project, you will find a map of all the different orgs and the amazing projects that you all can bring in and listen and learn from.
That's a fantastic suggestion. I think that's really, really wonderful. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And like you said, you don't need to put all of the onus on your, ERG, your employee resource group, your those orgs.
Or like the one trans person that's in your office.
Exactly.
Or a non-binary person, you know, and I think to me, that's why really folks should think about their relationships, like who in your own personal relationships, in the relationships that your companies have, that your, you know, legal org has, like what are those relationships that you're fostering and that you're intentionally building with community?
Yeah. I want to remind folks that they can ask questions in the chat box. So if you have any thoughts, any questions, things you want us to return to, please feel free to post those.
Yeah.
I did have one comment. What you were just saying, I think, is so valid. The one trans person at your company, you know, be mindful of things like a survey isn't really anonymous, like a community survey, a company survey. If there's, you know, the one trans person in your office and they're going to be outed by a survey or something like that. Yeah. So really thinking about other ways, like you said, to connect to your community. And
I think, I mean, again, there's lots of, I think your groups should really think about the ways it's engaging with community. I think that's really going to help make the difference in terms of your awareness of the issues and how they impact people and how they impact particular, you know, communities in very specific ways. There's like simple things as well, like it just went in group settings or in whether mixers or activities or team builders or whatever, like everyone should be, you know, introducing themselves with their, you know, pronouns. And, you know, I think that's another sort of way that it's not just the one person who is, you know, identifies non-binary or trans that should feel that it's on them, you know? And I think that's the part where you're just, for folks that have a different experience that are cisgendered, that is something that, you know, folks have taken for granted, that your presentation is what people see is how you know, identify, and that's just not true for everyone.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to really practice that. I remember starting in law school and coming to groups that were even billed as queer, billed as LGBTQ inclusive. And it was clear that the cisgender people, when answering those questions, felt really uncomfortable and would sort of laugh awkwardly or in discomfort. And that doesn't make anyone else in the room feel comfortable. So being prepared for that kind of dialogue when you're entering a new space or when you're holding space, being prepared to answer those questions is normally as answering your name and introducing yourself will really help everyone feel more comfortable.
But yeah, and like supervisors, CEOs, you know, they help to set the tone, you know, and I think, you know, they're, at the end of the day, like I've always, you know, I worked in the corporate world for a minute, and the biggest things in for-profit and corporate world is, you know, like your biggest asset are your people. Your people are the, like, the magic sauce of what makes things happen and work, and, you know, whatever it is that you're selling or promoting or like offering services, you know. And I think in that way, you really have to think about the culture shift within your organization, within your group, and how does that really like include everyone and various experiences and diverse experiences. And you might not get it right the first time, but I think trans people are fighting for our lives every single day. We are fighting, and we are trying everything. We're everything in the kitchen. We're throwing everything in the kitchen sink to figure out how we can get free, how we can have our basic rights, and how we can actually live the life that we deserve. All queer and trans people deserve to live with dignity and respect and belonging and feeling a part of something that's not just based on like discrimination or othering, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you talked about CEOs in corporate world, I was reminded, you know, it's not just nonprofits are not immune. Certainly government agencies are not immune. We all know that. But being mindful of that too. Don't assume that just because you hold a social justice mission that you are immune from the ways, what you were saying at the very beginning of this talk about that we have all been conditioned in this society. We need to be mindful of that.
Right. I mean, even oppressive systems are trying to figure out the problem.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Jails and detention centers are doing gender 101s.
Yep.
And it actually doesn't mean anything in those in that context.
Exactly.
You know, in that violent context. So
yeah, the dehumanization otherwise is so much more pervasive. Yeah, 100%. I saw the ICE posted on Twitter about Pride, and DHS is flying a rainbow flag. Okay, and yeah, it's really offensive.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, that's where the consciousness raising was really important, is that we can't, especially during Pride, you see a whole bunch of corporations, you see a lot of the co-opting of Pride, and from companies that are doing otherwise, like that are also like fueling, you know, hate groups and messaging that is harmful for trans people, you know, and so they're donating, making PAC donations, you know, and all the meanwhile they're forward facing, their front facing public face has a rainbow, you know, and it's, so I think that's where we have to, like, that critical lens and that really digging deeper, is really important to really understand sort of like how, like, those contradictions, and that like, on the one hand you have this like public support, but on the other, like, these are companies and corporations and groups that are like fueling, you know, harmful, you know, messages of hate and intolerance.
Yeah, absolutely. We've spoken about how individuals at the higher level can set the tone. Do you have any suggestions for how individuals who are not in positions of that kind of power can maybe start to confront individuals or enact change at all levels within organizations?
Well, you know, I think it's, you know, before anything else, I am an organizer. People power is, like, for me, the like secret weapon all the time. And so I think for folks at groups and organizations, you know, companies, when they're facing microaggressions and these moments of just, you know, where they're being othered, that I think from supervisors or folks who have a different, you know, power dynamic, that I think that's the time to get support and to really, to not isolate yourself, and to really seek support from community and from other folks in your, whether it's department or your group, and it's like you don't have to face these microaggressions alone, because like I said, they all add up over time and they become places of deep wounds, and so I think it's like really figuring out who your support system is, and how can you really leverage that and really use that to like not face it alone and feel supported through the process of accountability. Because I think that's really important in facing some of these things where folks are feeling a lot is happening, to the person when they're faced with those things. And so to slow things down a bit and to really kind of ground yourself before like addressing the harm that's happened, I think is really important, because things move really fast and interactions happen really fast. And sometimes you don't feel the impact immediately, it happens later. And so I think that's why, getting support is really important, during, for in particular when it's happened. So.
Yeah, absolutely. How can you continue advocating or stand up for yourself if you're not, like you said, grounded and taking care of yourself too? Along those lines, how do you take care of yourself? What are ways that you show up for yourself so that you can keep doing this work too?
I mean, therapy is great. I love a therapist. We should all normalize, you don't have to be in a crisis.
That they're here. And I think Issa's back. So I'll ask this question for you too, Issa, because we got it from the audience. Some folks are here because they have family members or colleagues or friends who had to leave their jobs because of transphobia. And I'm wondering if you can name a few resources, maybe legal resources that people can use when something like that happens to them, like when they do have an employer who's being aggressive.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, there is the national legal orgs. There's Lambda Legal. There is Transgender Law Center, of course. The National Center for Trans Equality, Transgender Law Center, if I didn't mention that, and NCLR, National Center for Lesbian Rights in the Bay.
I would point folks towards Legal Aid at Work, LAAW, there we go, is a wonderful organization that also has a lot of self-help materials too. So if you go to their website, they have several other guides. It's often not just one thing too. They also specialized in disability advocacy too. So like Issa was saying, it resonates a lot with me in my personal experiences and the experiences of my clients, that individuals will often face compounding situations. So if you are not being given, a reasonable accommodation at work too, they have self-help guides about how to advocate for yourself in the workplace. And they also have legal clinics. So Legal Aid at Work is great. They only operate within California, but it is statewide. It's a great organization.
Yeah, and most of the national organizations, if they're not able to do something immediately, they have referrals with local groups and connections, and so, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
But that's a good start.
And on the point that you were making, Issa and Ari, earlier about sort of like corporations showing up for Pride on one end, but then not showing up outside of Pride. I'm wondering for people who are here from firms or companies, can you talk a little bit about sort of maybe personally why Pride is important for queer folks and how that sort of shallow showing up can actually do more harm than good?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sends mixed messages, right? Because at the same time, that from the months of January through May, we were seeing all these harmful legislation and policies being introduced in various states, and there was radio silence, right? Yes. And so then Pride comes, and then all of a sudden things turn rainbow, and inclusion is really celebrated. And so it sends mixed messages, and it really, because you feel like during this 1 month, you have to really say all the things and feel safe to be and to and to advocate, but then what happens the rest of the year and the rest of the time?
Yeah, absolutely.
The matter is that anti-trans bills, like, all these harmful, like, discriminatory bills are being introduced every single year. And we don't see that level of support. And, we know that, like, an example of North Carolina, when HB2 was introduced, that when corporations put out statements condemning this legislation, it made a difference, when, larger groups and firms, kind of pulled their voices together in letters, it really made a difference, in terms of, like, threatening not to host their conferences there, to pull their like satellite office or whatever it is. And so I think that to really understand what's happening on the legislative level in your state is really important, and I think that really sends a clear message to your employees and to the workers and to folks in your groups that, these issues are really important, that I think that even on just that level, making these affirmative statements or to really acknowledge what's happening is really important.
Yeah. If corporations spent the millions of dollars they're spending on these rainbow campaigns, new products that they want us to buy, and instead put it towards those organizations, like you said, that are actually on the ground, actually doing the work, supporting people directly or fighting against this legislation, it would make a difference. And that's how people can actually show up in a tangible way.
So we're about almost done here, but Issa, I was wondering if you can leave folks with maybe one, so so it's a lot of lawyers in the room. Can you leave people with maybe one sort of tangible piece of advice that they can take back to their workplace? Maybe one thing that they can implement that's within reach for a lot of people.
I think that I really appreciate how much Issa spoke about bathrooms. I think that organizations need to step up more and really take a hard look at their policies there. That's just one example. But for individuals who might not be out, who might be questioning, who might be in a process of transition and things, having safe access and being able to use facilities in a way that doesn't out them, that doesn't create conflict and lack of safety would be extremely important. And organizations really can analyze that and make that change. Issa, can you hear us? Are you back?
I'm back.
Great. Did you want to answer Carlos's question?
Yeah, I mean, my last thoughts and reflections are that, our queer and trans communities are fighting for basic rights still. Like, that is the context that we're living. Yes, we've had these Supreme Court wins, and slowly, culture and pop culture is catching up. But at the end of the day, we are still facing attacks that are really impacting our ability to live our daily lives, and that hate groups and groups that are really promoting this. It's never just about the bathroom. It's never just about young people, their ability to play sports and make decisions. It is the question that they are trying to really move is questioning people's humanity and dignity. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the part that we have to read between the lines and the message.
Oh no, lost her again, but she's absolutely right.
Yeah, no, that was an important point. And I think with that, Ari, do you want to give folks a little preview about our next few events that we're going to be having?
Yeah, absolutely. So next up on the 22nd, we'll be having a discussion with incredible leaders, Sharita Gruberg and Arya Saeed of the Transgender District. And we'll be discussing a lot of issues at the intersection of queer identities and folks who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and sort of roots of intersecting racism and homophobia and transphobia. And then on the 30th, we will be speaking about being queer and undocumented and looking at that intersection as well. So I really hope all of you can join us for those other conversations.
And Issa, just any parting thoughts for folks in the room about how they think about Pride and sort of what you're going to be doing this Pride season?
Issa, were you able to hear us? It doesn't
Can you
look
hear
like.
me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I can't hear anyone, but
Oh no.
yeah. So just to say that I think folks really need to understand that for trans people and for queer people in the workplace, that what's happening inside the workplace is actually there's a larger manifestation, and I think to understand that really kind of puts things into perspective around your role and your responsibility, how to show up. Because at the end of the day, I think, at least for myself, I'm not just fighting for trans people, I'm fighting for everyone's humanity and dignity. And harmful institutions and harmful behaviors really put into question our rights and our humanity. And it slowly breaks it down, and I think that's why we can see the extreme forms of violence that exist in our society. It's because it's the slow breakdown that happens bit by bit. And so if we can't nip it in, if we can't really address it in like interpersonal level in our workplace, we have a long road ahead of us when we're trying to really address the systemic issues.
Yeah.
So I think to me that's what that stake, that's what the takeaway everyone should leave, that it's actually that whatever's happening in your groups, in your workplace, is a larger manifestation. And so we all have a responsibility, whether you're trans or not, or however you identify, to really, really raise our consciousness around these issues.
Yes.
Thank you so
Excellent.
much. Thank you. I really appreciate sharing the space with you. And I think, if anything, the tech issues sort of reinforce how precious these spaces are, and how thankful I am to be in this room with you all. So happy Pride, everyone watching us. Happy Pride, Ari. Happy Pride, Issa. Thank you to the two of you for all the work that you do. I think that both of you are such an inspiration to people. I can imagine a young person watching your conversation today and feeling like they have a better sense of themselves by being able to see themselves in you two. And I think that that is such a beautiful thing, a beautiful pride gift to leave the world.
Great.
So thank you so much, everyone. And stay tuned for the recording of this event, which you'll receive in your email in a few hours. And also make sure to sign up for part 2 and part 3. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.